Have you ever felt a shift in the air? A moment that leaves you breathless? In a quiet home filled with books and jazz, two lives intertwine unexpectedly, revealing feelings neither anticipated. What happens when family becomes something more, and love quietly blooms in the most unlikely places? Stick around as we explore a journey of emotions, choices, and the beauty of connection. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more captivating stories. I never pictured life could feel so still. Despite all the commotion and liveliness of Los Angeles, it never quite penetrated the quiet walls of my small house. I had come to embrace being alone. It was constant, something I understood. I filled the hush with pages of novels, gentle jazz tunes, and early strolls beneath drowsy skies. That was all before Adam came into the picture, my sister's son, 25, freshly relocated from the East Coast, pursuing dreams of acting and in need of somewhere to crash. I welcomed him in. It felt like the right move. It had been years since we last saw each other, not since he was a gangly, awkward teen with an endearing clumsiness. But when he appeared at my doorstep, suitcase in tow, the kid I remembered was gone. In his place stood a man poised, with kindness resting in his eyes and a smile that lingered longer than expected. He brought lightness into my space, the effortless kind that fills silence without needing to try. We quickly found a shared rhythm, sipping coffee together in the mornings, discussing life over evening meals, falling asleep to the same movie playing in the background every night. He picked up on the little details: how I liked my tea, how I only watered my plants when the sun shone warmly, how I often hummed without realizing it. His presence was calm, yet the way it settled around me was far from ordinary. One day, I caught myself standing in the kitchen doorway, watching him slice vegetables with his sleeves rolled up, softly humming to himself. He glanced up and smiled, just a regular smile, but it made my chest tighten. I laughed it off, telling myself it was simple admiration. But admiration doesn't leave you breathless. It was on a Thursday evening that something changed. I walked past his room, meaning to ask a question, and noticed the door slightly ajar. He sat on the edge of the bed, shirtless, headphones in, eyes closed, swaying gently to whatever he was listening to. There was nothing inappropriate, nothing beyond a private moment of someone simply existing, but something inside me shifted. A warm, unfamiliar feeling stirred and refused to fade. I stood there, rooted to the spot, heart racing, until he opened his eyes and caught me watching. I looked away too fast, mumbled an apology, and hurried off, my face burning for hours afterward. After that, I became hyper-aware of things: how his tone dipped when our conversations grew late, how his gaze lingered a bit longer when I laughed. I started questioning everything, trying to make sense of emotions that had no logic. He was family, technically, but not in a way that made what I felt feel forbidden, only surprising. And I couldn't ignore how my heart reacted whenever he was close. I kept telling myself to stop, to back away, but how does one quiet something that feels so intensely alive? I hadn't been seeking love, especially not with someone tied so closely to my past, but love, I was beginning to learn, doesn't wait for permission. It shows up quiet, disorienting, and sometimes in the most unlikely places. The energy between us had changed, even if no one had said a word. I felt it in his pauses before speaking, in my efforts to avoid sitting too close. But what we were creating wasn't space, it was tension, gentle but unmistakable. I began watching him more closely, memorizing how his eyes lit up when he talked about acting, and I sensed he noticed it too. He began sticking around longer during talks, asking more personal things, staying nearby without needing to. One evening, he asked me about my past, a question nobody had ever really cared to ask. I opened up about a love I once knew, one that faded before it could even begin. He listened, truly listened, as if my words held value. His silence didn't feel empty. It allowed room for mine. I felt seen in a way I hadn't in ages. There was no judgment in his expression, only a kind of softness that left me uneasy. He started cooking dinner more often, music playing while he moved around the kitchen like he'd always been there. I'd find myself leaning nearby, pretending to scroll through my phone while my eyes stayed fixed on him. Everything he did felt strangely familiar, like a pattern my body hadn't forgotten, but my mind kept trying to dismiss. And the more I resisted it, the stronger the feeling became. I hadn't been falling, I had already fallen. Naturally. Quietly. And I had no idea how to undo it. One evening, things felt different. We weren't discussing anything serious, but our eyes kept locking. He was talking about a script he was working on, but I wasn't really hearing him. I was watching his mouth move, watching how his hands moved as he spoke. Then he stopped mid-sentence, eyes locking with mine, not with confusion, but with understanding, like he finally saw it too. My heart pounded, but I didn't look away. The silence thickened between us. He slowly reached for my hand, stopping just short, his fingers hovering mere inches from mine. I stayed still, unable to move, breath caught in the weight of the moment. Then he whispered, "I don't want to make things complicated." I nodded, trying to swallow the chaos within. "But they already are," I replied quietly. Nothing followed. No dramatic action, no crossing of any boundaries, just a shared realization. Honest. Raw. Deeply personal. From that moment on, everything felt more intense, every touch, every look, every word not said. We never brought it up again, but the space between us pulsed with things left unspoken. That night I lay in bed, heart racing and mind tangled in thoughts. I wasn't afraid of my feelings, I was afraid of what they meant. Because this wasn't some fleeting attraction. It was real. And once something becomes real, it demands a decision. I just wasn't ready to make one yet. But I realized, deep inside, that a boundary had formed not of space, but of yearning, and everything had shifted. The days that came next dragged on, as if time itself had paused, watching us stumble around the truth we were too hesitant to speak aloud. Each moment between us became a careful dance near, but not too near, warm but never exposing too much. Yet beneath that quiet restraint, everything buzzed with energy. My awareness heightened whenever he was around. I noticed every subtle look, every soft grin, every inflection in his voice. He never stepped beyond the invisible line, but he didn't back away either, and that said more than anything he might have spoken. One morning, he caught me off guard with breakfast. Nothing fancy, just some toast, eggs and coffee, prepared exactly the way I liked it. He sat across from me, eyes fixed, expression difficult to read. "You've been distant lately," he said in a gentle tone. I nodded, unsure how to respond. It wasn't just silence I was coming undone inside, struggling to keep together a part of myself that had been quiet for far too long. He didn't push further. Instead, he reached across the table and barely brushed his fingers against mine. It lasted only a heartbeat, but the jolt it sent through me lingered long after he pulled away. Later that afternoon, he came back from an audition, wearing a look I couldn't quite decipher. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice gentler than usual. I gave a small nod, heart already thudding. He sat down beside me closer than he had in recent days. "We haven't actually said it," he began, "but I feel it, and I think you do too." His eyes held no masks, only honesty. I looked away because meeting his gaze made it harder to stay guarded. "I do," I murmured, barely audible. "But that doesn't make it simple." He offered a sad smile. "This wasn't what I came here for. I came to start over, not to fall for someone who already feels like home." That word home wrapped tightly around me, because that's exactly what he had become. A comfort I hadn't realized I missed until it showed up again in his presence. He reached for my hand once more, and this time he didn't stop halfway. His fingers folded into mine like they had always belonged there. "We're not doing anything wrong," he said softly. "But I'll wait however long you need." It wasn't his persistence that broke down my walls. It was the way he stayed still, offering himself without pressure. That night, sleep escaped me. I kept replaying each word, every glance, over and over. My mind tried to build barriers, but my heart tore them apart one by one. It wasn't fear of judgment that kept me awake, it was the fear of letting go of the one bond that had brought me back to life. By morning, I could no longer pretend. What we shared wasn't sudden or fleeting. It had been growing slowly, shaped by small moments, quiet understanding, and a connection that asked for nothing but honesty. Once you've felt something that true, denying its importance becomes the greatest deception. I opened my eyes that morning with certainty. The choice wasn't impulsive, it had taken time to form, layer after layer, piece by piece. The feelings I carried for Adam weren't misguided, they were genuine. They had grown in the subtle spaces in shared laughter over dinner, in conversations that made me feel noticed in ways I hadn't felt for years. Love doesn't always arrive in clear packaging. Sometimes it shows up quietly, wearing an unexpected face, and you just know. He was already in the living room, focused on something on his phone, completely unaware of the emotional storm I'd weathered overnight. I joined him on the couch and simply watched for a moment the calm on his face, the way he exhaled when concentrating. He looked up and smiled slowly, like he sensed a shift had taken place. "You look different," he said, lighter. I took his hand in mine, no longer feeling the need to hide, because I'd finally stopped resisting what I'd known all along. There was no dramatic reveal, no sudden declaration, just the truth, quiet and steady. His thumb traced gently over mine, and with that simple touch, everything settled. From then on, we didn't hide anymore. We let ourselves be near affectionate, deliberate. We still made dinner together, but now he'd slide his arm around me as I stirred the sauce. We'd watch movies and he'd lean his head on my shoulder. There was a peace in it all, as though we'd finally stopped waiting for outside permission and just started living in what had always been there. We didn't define it or talk about the future. What we had was the present, and that was enough. There was something deeply freeing in that, in its honesty. I came to understand that real love doesn't always follow the timelines or paths people expect. It's not always easy, but when it's real, it changes you quietly, deeply. He kept chasing his dreams, and I stood by him just as he did for me. We became each other's emotional home, healing wounds we never had to explain simply by being there. I hadn't felt this alive in years. Not because he did something extraordinary, but because he saw me completely and never once asked me to be someone else. I stopped questioning how we'd gotten here. I only knew I never wanted to return to the way things were before him, the silence, the uncertainty, the waiting. That was all behind me now. Love had stepped into my life in a form I hadn't expected, but it fit. It felt right. And in the end, the only thing that truly mattered was that it was real. Los Angeles moved on in its usual whirlwind, fast, loud, relentless. But inside our little world, time flowed differently, slower, softer, filled with purpose. I wasn't alone anymore. I had found love not where I went searching, but in the one place I never thought to look. It was close to midnight when Aliyah finally shut her textbooks and raised her arms in a long stretch. The gentle whirring of the ceiling fan filled the stillness of her room. A long, tiring day at the university had drained her energy, and the idea of rest felt like a well-earned comfort. She slipped under the blanket, her phone resting beside her, its screen glowing with unopened notifications, none of which she felt like checking. Tonight felt unusual, quieter, more tender. Maybe it was the soft breeze drifting through the open window, or the faint echo of laughter drifting up from the family downstairs. Her thoughts wandered to Hamza. Her cousin had come back 2 days ago after a business trip and was staying with them for the week. They had always been close, more like siblings chasing each other through the backyard, bickering over the television remote and sneaking snacks from the kitchen late at night. But something had shifted. He seemed changed, more reflective, more mature. And when he talked, it wasn't just casual conversation. It was like he actually saw her, not just as cousin Aliyah, but as the young woman she was turning into. Earlier that night, he had accompanied her on her walk back from the local bookstore. The walk wasn't far, only a few streets away, but he'd insisted on coming along. Their conversation was light. They spoke about her final college year, his career, and shared silly memories that made them laugh out loud. Yet, in between the humour, there were quiet pauses, not awkward ones, but the kind where emotions speak more clearly than language. At one point, she caught him watching her, his gaze holding just a moment too long, and she quickly looked away, pretending she hadn't noticed the warmth creeping up her cheeks. Now, nestled under her blanket, she thought back to that look and smiled. It was probably nothing, she reasoned, just him being thoughtful. But somewhere inside her, a quiet feeling had stirred, gentle and unfamiliar, but undeniably pleasant. Falling asleep didn't come easily. Her mind was busy, blending old memories with recent moments, his soft laughter, the calm way he spoke, how he'd waited patiently outside when she was running late. She had never viewed him as anything but family. Yet, life had a way of changing things. Just as her eyes began to grow heavy, her phone vibrated with a new message. It was from Hamza. "Let me know if you need anything. Sleep well." Simple, caring, and sincere. She didn't respond, just held the phone to her chest for a while and breathed deeply. She didn't have answers for the feelings rising in her chest. All she knew was that something inside her was beginning to pay attention to him in a way it never had before. And even though the emotions confused her, she wasn't ready to turn away from them. She was curious to see where they might lead, with a small smile still on her lips and his words glowing on her screen. She finally drifted off. Her sleep was light, peaceful, filled with a sensation she couldn't yet describe, but it felt like the gentle start of something meaningful. In her sleep, something in the room seemed to shift. The air carried a different charge, calmer, but tinged with something new. Though she wasn't fully conscious, her senses stayed alert. She noticed the faint trace of his cologne, the subtle creak of the door, the quiet rustling of footsteps on the carpet. Her heartbeat quickened, but she stayed motionless under her blanket, feigning sleep. Through partly opened eyes, she recognized him, Hamza. He moved softly, clearly trying not to disturb her. His gaze traveled slowly across the room until it landed on the small bedside shelf. He was holding something, a gift, modest and wrapped in delicate paper. He set it down carefully, his fingers resting on it for a moment as if reluctant to part with it. But he didn't leave right away. Instead, he remained where he was, standing in thoughtful silence beside her bed. His expression was peaceful but deep, holding a tenderness she hadn't seen in him before. Then he spoke, his voice so soft it barely made a sound, yet somehow she heard it clearly, even in her semi-awake state. "You've always had this light," he murmured, "even when you can't see it yourself." A lump began forming in her throat as unspoken emotions swelled. Her eyes stayed shut, but her heart was now completely aware. She could no longer pretend. It was clear he didn't only see her as his cousin. His words were sincere, spoken with intention, not drama. He stood there for a few seconds more, then gently pulled the blanket up around her shoulder with care, almost like saying goodbye without words. And just like that, he slipped out of the room, closing the door behind him with quiet grace. The stillness that followed rang louder than any noise. Alia opened her eyes fully, her pulse quickened by a mixture of confusion, warmth, and awe. Turning her head slightly, she spotted the gift. It was small and personal, a notebook. Inside was a note, written in his familiar handwriting. "Write what you feel, even if you never show it. Some truths belong only to you." Tears welled up, not from sadness, but from the powerful feeling of being truly understood. No one had ever spoken so directly to her soul. She clutched the notebook close to her heart, realizing she didn't need anything more in that moment. Everything had changed in the span of a few minutes. He hadn't crossed a line or touched her, but he had opened a door one she hadn't known was there. The questions remained, the boundaries still mattered, but something new had begun. Not through grand gestures or loud confessions, but through honesty and gentle care. Even as the night continued in silence, Alia understood that by morning, something inside her would be different. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, soft and golden as it filled the room. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she held the notebook tightly in her hands. She had hardly slept, her mind replaying every detail from the night before: his voice, his presence, the tender way he left the gift. She opened the notebook again, rereading his message. It was brief, but layered. Write what you feel. But what she felt wasn't just emotion, it was a wave, sudden and intense. When she stepped into the kitchen for breakfast, she tried to seem normal, though her fingers still shook slightly. She tucked them beneath the table while Hamza sat opposite her, calmly sipping his tea and chatting casually with her brother. When their eyes briefly met, the glance lasted only a moment, but it was all they needed. They both understood. Something had shifted between them, subtle, unspoken yet unmistakable. That afternoon she came across him on the veranda, alone and absorbed in his phone. She approached, heart racing but voice composed. "You left something in my room," she said, masking the flood of emotion inside. He looked up, locked his phone, and gave a small nod. "I just wanted you to have it," he replied gently. "You don't have to say anything." But she did. "You could have waited until morning," she said with a faint grin, aiming to keep things light, even though nothing about it felt simple. He returned her smile, looking a little sheepish. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "I'm not even sure why I did it. I wanted to." They sat in silence for a few seconds, the breeze drifting through the stillness between them. Then she asked, "Why now, Hamza?" He didn't avert his gaze. "Because I see you not as just family, not just a piece of our past. I see who you are today, and it matters to me more than I ever thought it would." His sincerity left no room for misreading. She had always appreciated his gentle demeanor and composed nature, but she never imagined it would lead them to this. Still, nothing about it felt out of place. In fact, it felt safe, unexpected, but safe. "I'm not sure what this is," she confessed, "but last night it made me feel something I can't quite explain." He leaned in slightly, not too close, just enough to make his presence intentional. "We don't have to label it right now," he said. "I just want you to know I care, that's all." Her chest felt a little less heavy. For the first time, she wasn't scared of the feelings taking root inside her. There were no promises made, no major decisions, just clarity. She gave a slow nod. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. He smiled, offering no more words, and none were needed. In that quiet exchange, something intangible was acknowledged. A foundation was quietly forming, one that didn't feel forced but seemed to be unfolding naturally with each shared moment. This wasn't about rushing into anything. It was about recognizing what had already begun to grow between them. The days that followed passed like a gentle haze, as though time itself was pausing to let Aliyah and Hamza find their way. Every look, every conversation carried an unspoken depth. Though they didn't speak of it directly, they were slowly adjusting to something new, allowing it to unfold without pressure. Alia noticed her heart opening little by little each time they spoke. The moments spent with him became the highlight of her days, even if they were just chatting about the weather or what to make for dinner. Yet beneath every exchange there was always something unspoken, something quietly resonating between them. One evening, as they watched the sun dip below the horizon from the porch, Hamza turned to her with an expression both soft and sincere. "We haven't really talked about this," he began, voice low and steady, "but I just want you to know I'm not in a hurry. I care about you, Aliyah, truly, and I want to see where this leads, even if we take our time." Her heartbeat quickened. She had been thinking the same thoughts, unsure of how to express them. Her feelings had gone beyond mere family ties long ago, but hearing him say it out loud felt like being gently held. "I feel the same," she admitted, barely above a whisper. "I don't know what this is either, but I don't want to ignore it anymore." Hamza's smile held a quiet understanding that told her she wasn't alone. "We don't need to define it right now," he said in a reassuring tone. "Whatever comes next, I want to be truthful with you. I don't want to hide what this is or pretend it doesn't exist. You deserve better than that." She nodded, her chest swelling with emotion, part tender, part terrifying. She didn't need any further reassurance. She already understood. They were on a path neither had expected, yet it felt honest. It felt right. Later that night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Aliyah sat by her window, gazing at the stars and reflecting on everything that had happened. She had no neat answers or future guarantees. But inside, she felt a gentle calm. She realized then that love didn't always announce itself with grand declarations or sweeping gestures. Sometimes it arrived as a quiet conversation, a mutual understanding, and the bravery to be honest with someone who truly saw you. She smiled to herself, knowing she was ready for whatever came next, not because everything was certain, but because the uncertainty itself felt safe. In that moment, she knew her heart had opened to something rare, something worth being patient for. And she felt deeply thankful that Hamza was there beside her, ready to explore this new beginning one step at a time.